One thing that I know is going to be a question that arises from this is when do we use cardio for a mini cut, right? Because I mean, there's a tool. It's a tool that is there. So, Bert, I mean, do you ever use cardio for mini cuts for yourself, for your clients?
This reminds me, I think it was one of those fat loss shows where they would take them on a cakewalk and they would what was it? Yes, like they're gonna hold a piece of cake that's like 700 calories while walking 700 calories just to see, like, I guess the difference. It's like it's a lot easier to not eat something than it is to, like,
Oh, yeah.
use the energy, right? So I think generally speaking, if you're going to create big deficits, because by the time someone they're ready for a mini cut, like we've decided this is the best way. This is a solid decision right now within the context of your situation. They probably are pretty good at training in the gym, so we want to protect that. So we don't want to create a whole lot of that deficit via the exercise. I think kind of going back to the cakewalk, which was a horrible thing to do that to that person, but it really drew home the point that it's just a lot easier to not eat 700 calories than it is to burn 700 calories. Like right now with my current mini cut, we have like 3 weeks of like going pretty hard on it again. I don't want to do cardio. It's like it's cold outside, and I want to save it all for the energy. So for all my energy for the gym. So we've been primarily doing it via diet. Although I mean, to an extent, you can negotiate ratios, but if you're going to be running a pretty assertive fat loss phase, you're probably going to want to do that mostly via diet, which again is another argument for like, hey, how about we just take that good old slow and steady approach? It's like, look, it's going to take twice as long, but you're not going to have to be starving, which again does things to people mentally, and again you have time to further sharpen up your fat loss skills because now instead of dieting for 7 weeks, it's a 12-week fat loss phase, and we're able to again implement a bit more of a educational component to the whole experience rather than just focusing on getting there.
I think a lot of it's context dependent too on the individual. Like for myself, like if I'm going to run a mini cut, I can't rely on foods cut as much because I'm very sedentary and I don't require a lot of food. I could hold 200 pounds on 2,100 calories probably.
Mhm.
So where am I going to go from there? Down to 1,500, 1,400? That's going to be, yeah, I could do that maybe for a week, but then after that, I'm going to be like, I'm ready to eat my arm off. So it makes more sense for me to maybe move more, and then kind of see where that takes me. And I think if it's done in a strategic way, you can preserve your training. There's easy forms of movement you can do: walking, light cycling. You could even think about, okay, how am I going to balance out the supply and demand aspect of everything? So let's say someone's training 5 or 6 days a week in the weight room. Well, okay, take it down to 4. You can still program in a way where you can maintain muscle because it's not going to require as much energy to maintain muscle as it is to build muscle. So even if you're cutting volume down a little bit, you're not going to atrophy, especially if the rate of loss is appropriate. If you're losing quick and you drop your training demand down, then I'd be a little more worried about it. But again, it's that rate of loss that I think is really important to holding on to muscle. So it just kind of depends on the person's situation. A construction worker, a big male, yeah, let's slash food down. Let's not have him do cardio. It just depends on a lot of context. But I agree, though. It's like easier to maybe not eat something than it is to power through 700 calories of cardio. That's going to take a lot of time and energy to do that. But that's kind of my thoughts. It's like I like to examine each individual. It's like I dive into the context and see what kind of makes the most sense from a practical standpoint as far as their ability to execute in a least invasive way.
One thing with a
couldn't
mini
agree
cut,
more.
well, you're going to see transient losses in performance. Like that's just it. Like there's just, yeah, and you have to be okay with that, and you have to know that like it's fine. Like you're not disappearing, and a whole lot of people are not ready for that. Like right now, I'm going pretty assertive, and I know that hey, it's like, hey, bro, don't try to just match up these reps, or you're matching up these reps that you were doing earlier. It's like just kind of let it go, because I think if anything, like people have I think with fat loss in general, they tend to often train harder than they need to, because at this point it's more like defensive lifting. And if you are mini cutting, it is really defensive lifting. Like you are there to maintain. Whereas with a slower fat loss phase, it's like you might still hit a few PRs. I have not hit no PRs since I've done this. I've basically
But
seen
that's
the slow
probably a
decline.
mistake people make, is that when they do a fast mini cut, and again, if it's appropriate for the person, but a lot of them make the mistake of trying to train with the same volume, same intensity. And they might get away with it for a week, but then the second week, they're like, holy shit, I just hit the wall.
Yeah.
And then there's that mental freak out that goes along with that. So I think, it just makes sense. Like if you think from a supply and demand perspective, you drop your calories way down, well, now your overall supply goes way down. So if you have the same demand, something's going to take a hit. So it's like, it's okay if you bring some of that demand down as far as like your training. Like if you knock off 20% of your volume, nothing bad is going to happen. If anything, you're going to balance out your overall fatigue levels, and you're going to maintain your ability to perform, your ability to keep your loads up, the ability to recover really well after those sessions. So you're going to keep everything in a nice balance that way. I think a lot of times people make that mistake with harsh mini cuts, and also contest prep too. When you get deep into contest prep, it's kind of the same demand that we're under, but yet people make the same mistakes of trying to do too much. And I think that's where, I really try to stress the emphasis of rest days, the emphasis of sleep, and all those types of things, while we're kind of taking our body through harsh periods like that.
Yeah, and this really kind of circles back to our discussion that we had earlier, Berto, when you were talking about the conditions for a mini cut, and also with Jeff in context, I mean, perfect condition, in my opinion, there's like no cardio happening at all. Good amounts of body fat are there. Training performance is stellar, and it's kind of a no-brainer at that point. When there's no cardio happening, you can institute any form of cardio, and it's going to have a good effect. Now, the opposite of that, I'm never going to let somebody do a mini cut when they're doing 3 spin classes and 9 walks on their dog every week. Where are we going to go? How are we going to be able to expend more calories when you're already doing that?
You're going to jog with a dog.
Yeah, and that's, again, push back. How many more calories are you burning when you're jogging with the dog versus walking with the dog, So yeah, and again, size of the person, the size of the human, makes a big difference. If they're a small human and they're doing spin classes and they're walking their dog, and they're not uncomfortable with their body fat, you know what? I'm sorry, I don't care. This is not the environment for a mini cut. And if we try, we're setting you up for failure, is kind of the bottom line. You're going to beat yourself up because you couldn't do it. You're not going to like what you see because it's probably not going to work. And at the same time, you're going to kill yourself, So again, kind of getting back to the conditions for a mini cut, one end of the spectrum, good training. I'm not going to say high amounts of body fat, but at least you're a little bit uncomfortable with your body fat. No cardio for the most part. And it's a bridge. It's a bridge to get you from where you are now down a little bit and then back on the road to where it is that you're going. And on the other end of the spectrum, well, I'm not going to beat a dead horse. I just went over that pretty in depth.
On the mental side, I think in regards to to-dos, I like to have a person at the point where they can kind of auto-regulate their intake. They can eat that buzzword intuitively at this point. So it's like, hey, we were able to put together these long-term gaining phases without necessarily being able to track everything, and we're able to stretch them out to a reasonable amount of time. You don't get too fat. You make it look like you were tracking, but you really weren't. And then on the flip side, before we do the mini cut, it's like same thing. We have to have had a few successful fat loss phases as well, where I was able to tell you like, hey, you know what, these next 12 weeks, I want you to go ahead and bring me anywhere between 10 to 15 pounds. and they are able to do that without necessarily tracking. And then we can talk about like cutting the time in half. But again, there's like a lot of skills up here that I think you have to have sharpened.